Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this show. This presentation is coming from London, and it is a presentation of David Bedein's work. The presentation was conducted by David Bedein in front of a small audience in a North London synagogue in Finchley, to demonstrate to a small audience, and indeed to you, the audience of this show, exactly what is going on with regards to the Palestinian educational textbooks, which are financed by taxpayers' money through United Nations and ultimately through the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, for the purpose of inciting hatred and animosity against Israel. These textbooks are a pure work of brainwashing fiction, and they are designed to incite and stir up the Palestinians' deeds to blood. And I hope that you find this show and the material presented in it informative and useful, and also that you can use this show and the information in it to share with other people exactly what is going on with regards to the Palestinian Authority, their kids, their educational establishments, United Nations Relief and Works Agency schools, funded by the United Nations and British taxpayers and other countries' taxpayers into the bargain. It's really quite an eye-opener. And as you'll see from the slides in this show, I will include in this presentation various slides that are direct excerpts from these textbooks. Thank you for watching. Enjoy the show and share with your friends and relatives. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to give you a challenge, which is to improve how people see us who promote Israel. I've been in Israel for 49 years. I'm 32 years old, but that's besides the point. 49 years, and I've seen moments when Israel has been appreciated. The moment when we brought Jews from Ethiopia, the moment when we signed a deal with Egypt, the moment when we won the Eurovision in 1978. All kinds of moments come to mind. When we hit the reactor in June of 1981, when we rescued the people from Entebbe. There's been all kinds of good moments. I want to bring you back, as they say in my former country, to the days of yesteryear and renew them. You have no idea what power 20 people can have, okay? I'm trained in the world of community organization social work, although I work in the media. I started a project which has had international implications. UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, was so afraid of my visit to Parliament that they sent over 2 delegates to go to walk the floors of Parliament to make sure that no one would meet with me. Now, I'm a short fellow, so they couldn't see me anyway. But that's how afraid they are of what you're about to hear. Now, what do I mean by the concept of a few people making a difference? What is that all about? Well, I'm going to be 69 years old in a few weeks, and one of my friends in the US Congress, who's been there for 42 years, is retiring. I said, how does Congress work? He said to me, if we get 10 letters, this is from the Foreign Relations Committee in Congress in Washington, if we get 10 letters about anything, we go into a tizzy, we have an emergency meeting. 10. Because if 10 people with integrity write a letter, it's taken seriously. A gentleman was just speaking to me about the Islamic threat. We're not dealing here with the Islamic threat. We're dealing with the threat of 10 nations that overwhelm UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, with upwards of $70 million a year, unsupervised. Unsupervised. Now, what is that all about? What you have in front of you is a curriculum. Now, we're an independent agency. We're supported privately. You'll see from the envelope that we now have a British address where people can support our work. We do not want to be hampered by any government, nor compromised by any government. What you have in front of you is part of a curriculum, the first curriculum ever to promote the concept that children should conduct acts of murder. Okay? Clear. We're not dealing, not to contradict my host, we're not dealing with a curriculum of hatred. We're dealing with a curriculum of indoctrination to murder. When I began the project 32 years ago, and we started filming the children, we saw hatred. We no longer see hatred. We see children trained as robots to go out there and kill Jews. Now, if it was a curriculum supported by Iran, well, to an extent it's supported by Saudi Arabia, but by Iran or by the Arab countries, that would be one thing. I don't think that the Iranian parliament would welcome me very well, but okay, leave that as it is. We're talking about a system that was created initially in Sweden by someone named Count Falk Bernadotte, who later on was assassinated, but that's besides the point, who wanted to push the idea of the right of return to contradict the law of return. Okay? Now, Mr. Bernadotte was the UN, what's the mitafech? I can't think for a moment. He was the UN guy the mediator after the 1948 war. And he wanted to be fair to the Arabs, as he saw it, and to create a system where the Arabs would go back to where they came from in 1948, after they lost the war of independence. Who would know that the system that he created, which was created a few months after his death, on December 11th, 1948, called UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, would still be around today. At the time, there were about 500,000 Arabs who left their homes in 1948. Today, how many we're talking about? How many people are in 59 temporary refugee camps? 5.2 million people. 5.2 million people who are educated around the idea that they have to take up arms, to liberate Palestine and to take their homes back from 1948, even if the homes do not exist. Now, this sounds absurd. Now, since you hear from my accent that I'm originally from the colonies, or America, that we had a very famous magazine called Mad Magazine, which recently went out of business. In my days of counseling people for Aliyah, I would often get them a subscription to Mad Magazine to understand how things operate really in the US, in Israel, and on the subject that we're dealing with. Now, it's very hard. Now, I started 32 years ago, this project, and to make sure that Israel would be able to address the issue of what they call Palestinian human rights. What is the most important human right that one has? The right to dignity, to a future. And what has UNRWA done? The United Nations Relief and Works Agency has created a system where people remain in refugee camps under the premise and promise of the right of return. Okay? Now, as I started to hint, if this was dictated by the Arab countries alone, we could do very little about it. But this is a system supported by the Western nations. who don't want you to know about this. In other words, they would prefer you to think that it's just happening spontaneously. Now, when President Trump came into his position, I had the good fortune of happening to meet, I didn't plan it, to meet with his advisor who was visiting Israel, and I provided the advisor with this material, actually much more, because she went back to Washington with upwards of 20 books, actual books, for me to show, for her to show the president, the new president of the United States. Now, this, what I'm about to show you, this is mentioned, I believe, on page 38. Let's just look in this booklet here, if I'm not mistaken. On page, I'm sorry, not 38, but, excuse me.
Is this President Trump at all?
Yes, page 32, excuse me, page 32. Now, this is one of the features, new features of the school book. Now, when you want to know who's financing this school book, you are. That's why I'm speaking to you tonight. I'm speaking to you because of your responsibility of taxpayers of the UK, okay? Here you have a lady. That's no lady, that's my terrorist. This lady, her name is Dalal al-Mughrabi, and it's described on page 32, 31, 32. She murdered 38 people, including 13 children, and she's presented, and these are the books that are purchased by UNRWA for 321,000 children, 321,000 children as their curriculum. And she's presented as a role model, someone who conducted an act of mass murder. Now, this book came out only last year. Because people ask me often, has there been any changes in the curriculum? Yes, it's gotten worse, okay? And it's being obfuscated from you. It's being kept from you. You won't know this from the normal media, from the regular media, even though yours truly has worked in BBC, and I've worked in various other. I've worked in the Times of the Times of London. Our agency has provided service for a number of good papers and good media outlets. But this is the kind of stuff you're not going to see, even though it's publicly available. How did we get the school books? Now, we got the full set of school books, 365 school books. By law, I had to lower myself to meet Yasser Arafat 20 years ago, okay? Now, I'm trained in the world of social work where you meet all kinds of people, all right? We don't have to go into all the details of the kind of people you may meet when you're in social work. I met Arafat 23 years ago. Mr. Arafat, when are you going to speak words of peace in the Arabic language? He said, you must see my new school books. He didn't realize I would really get the school, go to the school books, go to their office and buy them. Our agency every year goes back and gets the new school books as they come out. Altogether, 365 school books have come out. We've examined, I have a staff of 3 PhDs, 3 Israeli PhDs, who in Islamic studies, and we have 4 Arabs working with us doing filming and analysis. So it's altogether 7 people, and another gentleman who is an Arab who is an expert in human rights. So 8 people altogether. It's a team, an Arab-Jewish team, okay? And we're independent, as I mentioned. And we're based in Jerusalem, although we're moving our office to Stockholm. We'll talk about that. Why? Now, this evaluation we made, our determination, now that we've completed the project after 19 years, is to bring this to each of the major donor countries, to constituents like yourself, to the parliaments. UNRWA was so afraid of my entry into the parliament, I'm serious about this, they sent over a representative to walk the halls of parliament to make sure we wouldn't see anybody, and they canceled meetings with us.
Which country? Which parliament?
The British Parliament. Yes. Yeah, we didn't get to see anybody. No, because they were intimidated by people from UNRWA. They said that there's an article in today's Jewish News that yours truly is a Kahanist and hates Palestinians. That's what they told them. Now, fortunately, by statistical error, sometimes you'll find people in the media to be straight enough to talk to you. So after 7 years of UNRWA spreading the lie that I am a Kahanist and because some kind of extremist, the correspondent for the Jewish News here in London called me, contacted me for my reaction. I said, isn't this funny? Because I used to debate Rabbi Meir Kahane. I'm not in his ilk of thinking, way of thinking. That's very strange. And then I was misquoted in the newspaper known as Haaretz, saying all kinds of crazy things. I said, well, they wouldn't even let me write a letter to the editor. 7 years ago, they started this campaign that I'm a Kahanist, a hater of Arabs, and all kinds of other things. And that's what was used in the British Parliament to stop anyone from meeting me. Now, I've been to the British Parliament before, by the way. I am here today in advance of our experts coming to London, because we're going to bring them to London in September. Our people who are experts on, we don't have really a screen to show you, but and I hope that if you would invite us to make a proper film presentation, we've made 24 films, okay? And those films show the UNRWA camps as they are, in their schools, in their summer camps, in demonstrations, etc. Now, our focus is to look at exactly what they're teaching. And their focus, and so we bring one person, one expert, who is an expert on the school books, as I mentioned. And he's come to the conclusion that the school books work on 3 themes. And this is Dr. Gross, who wrote this book that you're holding here. Theme number 1, demonization. Jews have no identity. Number 2, let me just look here. Delegitimization. Thank you very much. I owe you something there. Delegitimization. And the third thing, the violent struggle. The 3 points of the school books. That's the theme that goes throughout the school books. Why don't people know about that? Because UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, hired a public relations firm many years ago to disinform the world and let people think that there's a peace curriculum. Now, we challenge this in the United States Congress. All right? We challenge this in the United States Congress because that's what the US Congress was being told. And there they have something called the GAO. I don't know if you have that here in London, the Government Accounting Office, where they conducted a full-scale investigation of the school books based on our testimony, and the State Department saying, oh, there's a peace curriculum. And the GAO decided that we were correct, and the State Department was lying. I hope you don't mind me using such a word, lying, but they were lying. But this is what we've been facing all these years, okay? For the last 26 years, we've been dealing with this issue of a peace curriculum that doesn't exist, which is being told but to the member nations exists, and we're showing the curriculum that actually does exist. I'm not going to say thanks to Yasser Arafat's integrity, but sometimes, because that wouldn't be a correct word to use, but we'll just say it's a statistical error that we use an expression sometimes that immoral adversaries make stupid mistakes. So he made the mistake of sharing this, and every year we come back and buy the new school books. We have the letter from Arafat. What kind of more, I'm in a synagogue right now, a greater mishaberach than that, what can you find, right? But that is how we get this material, okay? Now this is serious stuff. This is not something that can be pushed aside, although the entire Jewish establishment in the world puts it aside. So I'm David, and that's a great Goliath in order to overcome it. What my request is, now in September, the UNRWA mandate, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency mandate, is going to be suspended. It's going to be suspended. Every 5 years it expires, and the United Nations General Assembly meets to renew it. This manishtana, what is new this year? This year, we want to bring our experts to testify in 20 nations 20 parliaments to question whether their funding should continue and whether UNRWA should continue without conditions. So when we come back to the British Parliament with our experts, we want people like yourselves to be in touch with MPs and say this has to be taken seriously. These people should not have, the UNRWA should not have an automatic renewal of its funds. Now, when you have the chance, you have my business card with you. On my business card, there's two websites there. One of them is IsraelBehindTheNews.com, and on that, as you scroll down to the right, you'll see our films. Take a look at those films. We can't quite show them now. I think what I'll do is I'll show one that's very easy to see and very easy to absorb, which is the singer of UNRWA, who travels the world singing songs about liberating Palestine and killing the Jews who are here. And that's featured. Now, one of the absurdities is that this is a United Nations agency. Now, does a United Nations agency promote murder? In this case, yes. It's hard to believe. Now, I have to be able to speak in a very calm, clear tone, so I don't think I'm totally meshugana, because it's not easy to absorb what I'm saying, okay? Now, this is denied knowledge even in Israel. Now, understand something. The map I have over here, to my left, okay? It says Palestine 1948, commemoration of Nakba, 60 years in exile. This is an English version, which I got here in London many years ago, when I went to the Right of Return, the Right of Return Center here in England, in London. And this is a translation of the map that the Arab children see every morning. Now, what they see as the places they must liberate are the places they lost in 1948. The children sit in the UNRWA camps according to where they came from in 1948. You walk up to an 8-year-old child and you say, "Where are you from?" He'll say he's from Yaffo. Have you ever been to Yaffo? No. But the Jews came and murdered my grandmother, my grandfather, and raped my grandmother. As a matter of fact, that's how the school day begins, with a little song like that. They raped my grandmother and murdered my grandfather, excuse me. And the concept is that all these places here have to be liberated. And these are called the illegal settlements. The illegal settlements, in the PLO/UNRWA point of view, are within the Green Line, not in Judea, Samaria, Gaza. Okay? In the one interview I had with Yasser Arafat, the head of the PLO, I'm not going to say necessarily of blessed memory, the one interview I had with him, I asked him, and I brought some people from Gush Etzion with me, I said, "What is our status in your state?" And he said to us, "You did not take any Arab land, you can stay where you are. But if you're from Ramla or Lud, you'd have to leave." Because he then explained to me, which is the theme of the school books, there are settlements where you live in Efrat, what's also known as the West Bank, and there's illegal settlements within the Green Line. Now, that's not something most people understand. As a matter of fact, hardly anyone knows that. When you're in Khalid, now I'll give you a quick story. There's many, many stories which illustrate this issue, okay? The few places that we're allowed to speak in Israel, and just by statistical error, there's a few places that allow us to speak, because this is not something people want to hear. I was invited to address a retirement home in Netanya. Now, Netanya, according to our Arab friends, is known as Khalid, because there was an Arab village there before 48. Anyway, I gave a talk about the right of return, and people were very uncomfortable with my talk, and how the people want Khalid. They don't want West Bank, they want Khalid. And how shall I say, perturbed, bothered. And then I saw a hand in the back. An Arab nurse asked if he could say something. So, well, Makash, please, say something. He said, he gave me a compliment. This is the best talk he's ever heard. Give us Netanya, and we'll have peace. Now, when I called home and I said to my children, that this had happened. They said, was that one of your interns dressed up like an Arab? Well, it wasn't. It was genuine. Now, let me see if this will work now. I wanted to show you at least one short clip of the youth idol who sings for UNRWA. Now, let's just take a look at this.
Muhammad Asaf.
Yes.
Video, yeah.
Yes, this is Muhammad Asaf. Yeah,
You want me to play it?
yeah, please.
A more appropriate definition might be war starts with UNRWA. One of UNRWA's newest employees is
This is not easy to hear.
a singer from Gaza whose mother taught in UNRWA schools.
This is a clip prepared by UNRWA itself. This is the head of UNRWA receiving him very nicely.
Many important people, but I have never seen so much expectation.
Even though his songs repeatedly praise martyrs and violence,
That's a dead child going through on the way to his burial. He's singing songs which accompany this funeral. Your son Gaza will not be forgotten. Lift your head up high, it is your weapon. We will protect the land, either victory or martyrdom. The men of this land said, take my blood and give me freedom. My land is from river to sea. Take my blood and give me freedom. My land is from river to sea. Okay. These are clips made by UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, as he's going into starting his songs. And the message is very clear: the violent liberation of Palestine. Now, if any of you were teenagers, you would know what a youth idol is. He's a youth idol. How many people have clicked onto his site? 36 million. So that this guy is very famous. One of the things we're asking you to ask the British government is, why not ask UNRWA to fire him? Because he's using public funds allocated from the UK and the other nations. Altogether, there's 67 nations that allocate to UNRWA, 40 of whom are Western nations. Is this appropriate? All right? So this is a clip produced by a United Nations agency. Okay? This is not acceptable. But what we need is for you to say that to the new Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. 12 years ago, or 13 years ago, when he was running for mayor, I came to London and I met him. I told him a little bit about the system. He says, when I can, I will take this on. And I don't think he was patronizing me. This is not people having peace demonstrations. What we have here is a system which has never existed before on behalf of a country. Any of you knew Professor Robert Wistrich? A very wonderful man, one of my mentors in the world of education. I had the pleasure of orienting him on these subjects. The day before he died, I showed him the curriculum that you're holding, actually the previous book. And he said there was nothing like this in Nazi Germany. Nothing like this in Nazi Germany. The Germans did not have textbooks instructing people to kill or glorifying those who had conducted acts of murder. What's very important to understand is this stands by itself as a unique system. A unique system. To call the PLO Nazi would not be appropriate because they're a step beyond that. Now, again, this would sound almost like insightful because the PLO, Yasser Arafat got the Nobel Peace Prize, right? When he got the Nobel Peace Prize, I was there as a journalist, and I asked Arafat a question. I said, we just heard from Mr. Rabin and Mr. Peres that you're going to be quashing the Hamas terrorist organization. His answer to me, and he answered, was, I don't understand your question. These are my brothers. Now, there were 250 or so journalists in the audience. None of them reported it. I couldn't report it because, believe it or not, the press conference took place on Shabbat, and I had handed over my equipment to a young lady from the Norwegian Foreign Ministry and gave her a maybe 2-minute explanation of what the halachot of Shabbat are, that I couldn't hold my microphone. I couldn't record it, and I said, well, there's all these other people who are going to record it. Isn't that nice? None of them used it. There's no conspiracy here. There's a policy to protect these guys. Now, this little poster here, you haven't taken it. This is a poster which, in a sense, promotes what we're trying to do. And if you need more copies, I have more copies here, it's fine. This here, this picture here, which is also, again, I'm going to be offering my book. I only have my last copy of my book called Roadblock to Peace. And on the back of it is my presentation several years back at the British Parliament, okay? This here is a key, a 1,000-pound key, a keyhole, next to the United Nations office in El Aida. El Aida is a refugee camp. The word, that, if you know a little bit of Arabic, Aida means return. And it is about 200 meters away from Kever Rachel, the grave of Rachel. And those of you who've been to the Kever Rachel, the grave of Rachel, it says there's a big sign, our children have returned to their borders. And here it says in Arabic, our children will return to their borders, okay? And in our films, we interview the people who live in Al Aida and go to school there. This is their education. If this was being promoted, I will emphasize this, by Iran, couldn't do anything about it. But since this is being promoted by 20 major Western nations, I don't believe that any nation, any Western nation made a decision. No one made a decision, we're going to set up a system to kill Jews. I don't believe that. I don't believe it. Precisely. By default. And default is our fault, it's our fault in a sense. This is the result of not dealing with the issue. Now, all sides of the Israeli spectrum, political spectrum, ignore this issue. Why? Why? It's not convenient.
Why isn't it convenient?
Well, I'll tell you, it's much more glorious for one side to say what they want is the West Bank, and the other say you're not going to get the West Bank. So that's what's going on in Israel right now. In other words, the decision, the big debate in Israel is, should we hold on to West Bank or should we not? This has nothing to do with what's going on. Our voice is a voice of saying the whole political spectrum in Israel is ridiculous. Ridiculous. They're not dealing with the real issue. The issue is education for war, for liberation of all of Palestine. Now, the decision made by the government of Israel in 1993 was to put this thing aside. We'll deal with it later. We'll deal with economic development, things like that. The decision of Israel's national camp was to fight for Judea Samaria, which is good. I live in Efrat. Why not? It's a good fight. It's a good fight. But it has nothing to do with reality. All right? Now, I want to just say a side note. What's the difference between a genius and a crackpot? Anyone know? A genius is a step ahead of his time. A crackpot is 2 steps ahead of his time. So you'll have to decide which I am. Okay? And if you don't maintain a sense of humor in all this, you go mad. But you have to stay with it. And notice that most people don't deal with the real issues of what's going on. The message I have for you, tonight, Israel Television will feature the film that we produced this morning. Okay? While I'm in London, we're producing a film in Gaza, where the children are marching, are getting prepared to march on the fence to take back their homes from 1948, which they think are still there. Okay? That's the absurdity. The absurdity that children are being educated in this way. But again, precisely. It's not a matter of incitement, but brainwashing. If any of the 20 major donor nations that we're going to go to, and the UN itself, if any one of them will object to this, the whole system may fall like a deck of cards. It can fall, it can stop. Because I do not believe, and I'm repeating this, I want to be very clear, I do not believe that there was a decision made by any of these governments, no matter how negative, no matter how nasty they are to Israel. I don't think there was ever a decision made, we're going to teach children to kill the Jews and take their land back. I don't believe that was done. Now, if I'm mistaken, tell me. Because I follow the media ever since opening a media office 32 years ago, and we notice if this thing happens. It's not that we had 25 Jeremy Corbyns running the world. We have people not paying attention and not being pushed enough from down under. Now, why did I mention the example of my friend who's retiring from the U.S. Congress? Because when he said to me, and this is when we made a presentation at the British Parliament 6 years ago, MP Bob Blackman and MP Louise Hellman chaired our session where we made presentations. They both said, we need constituents to push us. We need 10, 20, 30 letters to push us on this issue. Well, we were then asked not to come back by the Jewish organizations that had brought us because it disturbed the peace process. Okay, that's the way it is. Now we're back again. There's a new government here in the UK, and I'm optimistic. Those of us who know some Hebrew, in optimistic we say optimi. You know what optimi is all about? It's up to me. Okay? It's up to me. Those of you who own pens, there's a pen. Those of you who own computer, I'm not patronizing you. Those of you who are capable of writing a short letter, and you can take a look at our films, which are not popular, but they speak for themselves. We filmed the children who are rushing the fences. We filmed their summer camps. We filmed their schools. And they agree to be filmed because they're proud of it. They're proud of their ethnicity. And our Arab crews, think that this will scare the Jews out of Palestine. That's their agenda. So their agenda meets our agenda. Okay? Our agenda is but the truth is it's their agenda also. This creates many quote-unquote funny stories because I accompany journalists to the scene of the crime, to what's really happening. I'll never forget, I was with a major British correspondent, and he heard that I had good contact with the Jews and the Arabs on both sides, so I make my living taking him around. So I said, I'm going to bring you to the head of the PLO in Jerusalem, and I explained to him a little bit of the PLO. The PLO, on the one hand, wants to destroy Israel and kill all the Jews. On the other hand, they have new business enterprises working with the Jews. He said, that's interesting. We got there. We met with the head of the PLO. At that time, the PLO had headquarters in Jerusalem, something called the Orient House. And he asks him, I understand that you have an agency to destroy the Jews and you do business with the Jews. He says, he puts out a coffee, very nice. And he says, you don't understand. First we do business with them and then we kill them. Now he wasn't kidding. As a matter of fact, this is one of it's almost like again, Mad Magazine. Those of you who know that forgive us from the colonies of knowing Mad Magazine, but the absurdity of the reality, he saw nothing wrong with it, he saw nothing funny about it. Those who promote economic peace do not understand that what the Arabs understand by economic peace is first we're going to be doing business, weaken them, and then go at them. And they don't hesitate to say so. Getting people to listen to that, I just noticed the date, that it's now July 2019. My grandfather in July 1919 came back to New York after a year of interviewing German POWs. He came back with a very terrible message. He was interviewing officers of the German army who were taken prisoner in France. And he came back with a message people didn't want to hear. What my grandfather heard was tenacity, that they're going to conduct another war because they're going to win. And he says these people want to win, and they're going to, and they're determined to win the next war. Nobody wanted to speak to my grandfather, and I feel like I carry his. Ironically, when he came back to New York and got married, his wife, my grandmother Rose, he was Grandpa Abe, Grandma Rose. She waited for him. It was wonderful. She waited for him, and they moved out to the suburbs of New York City to a place called Lynbrook, next to Malvern. Little did they know they moved into the center of German Nazi activity in the United States. And my grandfather, who became the head of the American Legion in New York, that's the veterans of World War I, he led a campaign to try to close down the Nazis in New York. It did not succeed. No one wanted to work with him, including the Jews. There was one rabbi, one Reform rabbi who helped him out, but that was it. And they more or less destroyed him. So I have that legacy, that burning legacy inside yours truly. So I noticed the date. This is the date that my grandfather returned from World War I to my waiting grandmother. Sometimes you see things that other people don't see. Of course, at that time, they didn't have the media. They didn't have these kind of cameras that you have today, etc. But it doesn't matter. We have all the equipment. We have all, and I was naive enough to think that once we would record all this stuff, people would wake up. Well, I'm sorry, but it hasn't happened yet. Where we have succeeded is with small groups like this, getting the point across. We don't have the equipment now to show you the films, fine. If you're kind enough to invite us for a film presentation, we'll come back and make a film presentation properly. And if you have, since I'm sure we applied for the Jewish Film Festival, I'm sure they wouldn't have us. So perhaps you'll have a film festival here and show show these films and invite MPs, invite all kinds of people. So all I can say is we have the opportunity to bring the truth out. These are the 3 weeks before Tisha B'Av. Very terrible things that happened to the Jewish people. Very terrible things. Part of the problem was when terrible things happen, we begin the prayer of Tisha B'Av, the lamentation. Echa yashva badad, how the Jewish people have sat alone. Hayta ke'almana, as if we were a widow that everyone had abandoned and forgotten. Well, all I can say is we sit alone, but we can still reach out, and we now have an Israel where people can go to. And yesterday was of course Herzl's yard site, and Herzl had the vision. You know, when you're a journalist, you see things other people don't see, and that's what I've seen by traveling around the world as a journalist. And when he was at, he was, about Herzl in the Dreyfus case? He covered the Dreyfus case. And he saw thousands of people in the streets of Paris calling for the death of the Jews. He said, we got to get the Jews out of here. So he saw things people didn't want to see, and he did something about it. He went, like we're doing right now, going to the parliaments of the world. I don't know if how much he went to the Jews. He went to the parliaments. He went to the king, the ministers. He went to the Pope. And incidentally, the first person to publicize these school books was Pope John Paul II. Now, I was very close to the papal nuncio at the time, the Pope's ambassador in Jerusalem, whose name was Archbishop Pietro Sambi. And we had a good enough relationship, I could joke with him that your boss and I have something in common because we wear kippot. Okay. When he saw these school books, when Archbishop Sambi, he reported it to the Pope. The Pope asked to see these books, and the Pope made an issue out of it. The Pope made an issue out of it in the Knesset and with all the diplomats in the world, that this cannot be. Now that Pope felt a little bit bad, because my professor, Arthur Hertzberg, had pointed out that the Pope did nothing when he was in Poland to help the Jews. So he said to his underling, Archbishop Sambi, if you see anti-Semitism, let me know about it. And when he saw these books, he woke up. So it's an absurd thing that the first major diplomat in the world to respond to these books And to shy about them was Pope John Paul II. I never expected that would happen. As a matter of fact, there's even a funny story when Archbishop Sambi asked me to bring the books. I just come from the office, from the Arafat's, the Minister of Education, and he was seeing the Pope the next day, and he called my house, for my office, and my house, and they hung up on him. They said, "You mean the Vatican's not looking for David Bedein?" He says, "I'll see you anyway, even though you've hung up on me twice. It's okay." But that's how it happened, and that's how the diplomats of the world began.
Is that Giovanni Roncalli,
I don't know who that is. I know
the Archbishop of Venice?
No, this is another archbishop. This is the Archbishop Pietro Sambi, who died 8 years ago. This is a letter. This is on my website. Okay, this is a letter to my to my intern from the what's called DSA, the Department of International Development of the British government, and my intern had written her a letter saying, how can you sanction having military training in the schools that you're functioning? And instead of denying it, she said, yes, we acknowledge it, and we condemn violence and incitement to violence. However, our support to UNRWA is based on stringent attention to their neutrality and values of peace. Now, we increased our planned funding to UNRWA, and she says that we have tools to monitor UNRWA's performance. Now, my friend Henry in Efrat, he said maybe they have a toolbox. We don't know. But this is a letter in which she acknowledges that she knows that there's military training happening in the schools. It's not that they don't know it, but here is a written acknowledgement. This is one of 4 letters that we have.
What year?
This is last year, the 22nd of August, 2018. Anyway, so that's a little bit of the presentation. Perhaps you may want to throw a tomato at me, I don't know, but if you have any questions, please, and just tell me who you are. And by the way, I asked
this issue of the Palestinian so-called right of return is a hotly contested issue. Speculation that the Trump administration may reject that call would likely send shockwaves throughout the Middle East. Today, the UN's Palestinian Refugee Agency, UNRWA, serves millions of second and third generation Palestinians, many of whom live in refugee camps to this day. But if these reports are true, the U.S. would seek to cap that number by nearly 90%. And with me now to discuss this is David Bedein, the CEO for the Center of Near East Policy Research. David, thank you for joining us.
Good to be here.
So my first question is, why do the Palestinians feel like they have a right to return?
The right of return, from their point of view, is the focus of their educational system, the focus of their whole life, the whole idea that they have prepared an entire generation to take their homes back from 48. It's not nostalgia, it's very real. And so Trump and other Western leaders are starting to understand the material that our agency has been putting out for more than 30 years, which until recently wasn't taken seriously, that they can actually are planning in all their classrooms and in all their informal activities to take back their homes from 48, even though those villages don't exist, but in the minds of the Arab children it exists to the point where they have military activities in the UNRWA schools and in the UNRWA camps all summer long, making plans, marching along the Gaza border and Gaza and pointing out the kibbutzim, which rest on the lands of the villages where they which were abandoned in 1948. Now, if you want to get on with the peace process, you can't do it both at the same time. You can't, on the one hand, want peace, and at the same time want to take back the kibbutzim and everywhere else. Now, what we're showing here on the television is what we filmed in a school where the children carry these keys, and on the back of the keys are the names of the villages they came from. And the kids are taught, well, you have to go back there and kill the people who live there. Kill the people who live there. And when the children in the Al-Aida camp, this is a picture of a keyhole and a key at the entrance to their camp, which is right near in Bethlehem, near the grave of Rachel, the matriarch. And it's the high idea of every child believing that they have a right to use a key to get back to their homes, as opposed to getting on with their lives. We're not talking about a small group of people. We're talking about 500,000 children and a population of 5 million altogether Arab kids who are in refugee camps. And the passion that they have not for, let's say, taking back Gaza or taking back West Bank, not Jerusalem, but for taking back everything they lost in 48, 531 villages, and the kids, they all live and they actually sit in the classrooms, according to where they came from. So the idea when Trump and other Western leaders are starting to say, excuse me, this is not appropriate for a UN agency, not appropriate for a peace process, this is a step in the right direction.
Well, isn't it, I mean, some have made comparisons to the fact that, the Jews, for example, before there was a state of Israel, they saw what now is Israel as their destined homeland for 2,000 years, and Jewish students and children would learn in schools in Europe, in the diaspora, one day we will return to Jerusalem, next year in Jerusalem. So isn't there something similar to that?
Imagine if there was ever a curriculum, which there isn't, in the history of the Jewish people, that you're supposed to go to a place and wipe out the Arabs or anyone who lives there. That's not part of the Jewish
Well, some would say that is somewhat what happened. In the 1948 war, many Palestinians who did live in those lands were expelled from their villages.
In the process of the war, yes, but that wasn't part of the education. And it never will be part of the education in Israel that you should go to an Arab village, wipe it out, and put the Jews there. That's just not part of it. What we have here is a situation where the Arab world, first, it was manipulated by the UN, and the UN could have done wonderful things to help absorb them, but the Arab world stood in their place, and the donor countries, $1.2 billion, which comes from the donor countries, which keep the people in the refugee camps under the illusion of the right of return.
So you're suggesting that the UN took over $1 billion purposely to keep Palestinians in refugee camps and just to keep them there to prolongate this process?
They don't deny it. They don't deny it. They're very, very proud of it. Today, the Saudis have a major role to play in keeping them there. The education system, the schools, the school books are coming out next week. And then the new school books are coming out next week, which you have here, the children learning that they're models, the role models. Here you have a picture. This is a book that came out in the UNRWA schools only 4 months ago, published by the Palestinian Authority. This is Dalal al-Mughrabi. Now, who is she? She's a hero in this book of 4 pages that the teachers learn how to teach the kids how to be like her. And who is she? She's someone who landed her a little raft on the coastal region in 1978 and commandeered a bus, murdered 38 people. And this is the role model. And there's no precedent for a school book being of that nature. The fact that this kind of school book is taught in an UNRWA school is in a United Nations school that belies the thinking. The thinking was always in Israel and everywhere else that if a child learns in a United Nations school, he'll come out okay. But the opposite is happening. It's getting worse, and it used to be just incitement. Now it's indoctrination. Every child is learning that he has to be like Dalal al-Mughrabi, and what we've been doing is translating the school books. And I assure you that if we ever found a school book which promoted peace, reconciliation, we would publish it tomorrow morning.
Sure. Well, unfortunately, we have to wrap this up. This is a very complex issue. I have to say that, it's a complex issue, and regardless of politics, of leaders, of agendas, UNRWA, United Nations, what have you, there are millions of Palestinians who, regardless of whether they should be in camps or not, are in camps.
Absolutely.
And that's a very big issue that the world is trying to figure out. David, thank you for joining us.
And anyone who wants to see our material, it's all there in pristine form on our website, israelbehindthenews.com, and we welcome people to take a look at it. We're trying to translate it into other languages and bring it to all the parliaments. And the expression we like to use is, let my people know.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for watching this presentation, which was presented by David Bedein in North London, in Finchley, in a synagogue. The presentation was organised courtesy of Zionist Federation UK for the purpose of demonstrating and presenting a brief excerpt of the material that can be found in the United Nations Reliefs and Works Agency books. This presentation is kind of disturbing, and unfortunately this is being funded by donation nations that are contributing to the United Nations Reliefs and Works Agency for the purpose of getting the Palestinian Authority to print and publish this material and disseminate this material amongst all their schools. The resulting factor, of course, is that Palestinians are being taught to be incited to acts of deeds, to stir people's deeds up for blood against Israel. Okay, and it is the reason why the majority of the Palestinians go to war against the Israelis, because they are taught to do so from a very young, early age in their schools. David Bedein's work is sterling and an incredible work, and by and large, largely unreported. So it's with that in mind that I've had to present this show, and I hope that you have found it informative, and not only that, that you can take this material and present it to your local member of parliament in this country, or whoever is your constituent political leader in whatever country that you see this material, and ask them, why is the government funding the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, which in turn is giving money to the Palestinians, which in turn is being sent to publishers to publish and print this material, which is then in turn going to the kids in the schools that are controlled by the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. This is an important job, actually. It's an important injustice that needs to be rectified and remedied. Namely, that we as citizens need to be able to say to our MPs, our local constituent politicians, can we earnestly encourage the political process, the political parties, and indeed the politicians per se, to stop funding the production of these books through the vehicle and organism of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. Thank you very much for this, for watching this presentation, this show. Until the next time, goodbye.